Please subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories. I stared at the empty space where my chair should have been. The Armitage family's anniversary dinner was in full swing around me, crystal glasses clinking, expensive perfume mixing with the smell of roasted lamb. But there I stood, cash in veille, like some unwanted guest at my in-laws' celebration. My father-in-law, Reginald Armitage, noticed me standing there and let out that booming laugh that always made my skin crawl. "Oh, Cashin," he called out, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. "You're nothing without us, boy. Absolutely nothing." The whole room erupted in laughter. Helena's cousins, her aunts, even the staff, seemed to find it hilarious. My wife Helena just looked down at her plate, not defending me, not saying a word. I felt my face burn with shame, but I forced myself to smile and nod like it was all just good fun. That's when I saw it. While everyone was still chuckling at my expense, Reginald slipped a thick envelope to his lawyer, Harrison Wells, who was sitting at the far end of the table. The exchange was quick, but I caught it. Something about the way they both glanced at me afterward made my stomach drop. I grabbed a glass of wine from a passing waiter and took a sip, trying to look casual. But inside, every alarm bell was ringing. Later that night, after most guests had left, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I slipped into Reginald's study. The envelope Harrison had received was sitting right there on the desk, carelessly tossed aside like yesterday's newspaper. My hands shook as I opened it. Corporate transfer papers. Armitage Global shares being moved around. And there, clear as day, was Helena's signature on several documents. They were systematically removing me from everything. The company, the trust funds, even joint accounts I didn't know existed. But then I saw something that made my blood freeze. At the bottom of one document was my own signature. Except I had never signed this paper. Never even seen it before. Someone had forged my name, and it looked perfect. I quickly took photos with my phone, making sure to capture every page. The documents showed they'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Helena wasn't just going along with her father's plan. She was actively helping him destroy me. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly put everything back exactly as I'd found it. When Helena's cousin knocked on the study door asking if I was okay, I was already washing my hands in the guest bathroom, acting like nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Helena's signature on those papers. For the next 3 weeks, I barely slept. Every night after Helena went to bed, I would sit in my home office, pinning receipts, bank statements, and notes across the entire wall. It looked like something from a detective movie, but I didn't care. I was tracing every single connection, every suspicious transaction. The Armitages thought they were clever, but they weren't careful. I found offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies with names like Beacon Holdings and Crown Consulting. Money was flowing out of Armitage Global like water through a broken dam, but it wasn't disappearing. It was going straight into family pockets. The more I dug, the angrier I got. These people had welcomed me into their family 5 years ago, made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Helena had looked me in the eyes on our wedding day and promised to love me forever. Now they were all conspiring to throw me away like garbage. But then I found something interesting. Buried in the company's founding documents was an old trust clause from 15 years ago. My name was on it. Something Reginald had set up back when he actually liked me, before Helena and I were even engaged. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. If certain conditions were met, this trust could give me significant control over the company. The conditions seemed obscure, but as I studied them, I realized something incredible. I might already meet them. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help from people I could trust completely. The first person I called was Maeve Alder, a forensic auditor who owed me a huge favor. 2 years ago, I'd helped her get out of an abusive relationship by giving her a place to stay and money for a good lawyer. The second call went to Declan Witz, a corporate lawyer with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court. Declan owed me too. I'd once saved his career by providing evidence that cleared him in a malpractice case. We met at a small cafe outside the city, far from anywhere the Armitages might see us. When I spread out the photos of the forged documents, both Maeve and Declan went quiet. "This is serious fraud," Declan said, adjusting his glasses. "If we can prove this pattern of forgery and embezzlement, we could destroy them completely." Maeve was already making notes. "I'll need access to the company's financial records. Can you get me in quietly?" I still have access to some systems, I said. They haven't cut me off completely yet. We agreed to work in complete secrecy. No emails, no phone calls, everything in person. As we were leaving, Maeve grabbed my arm. I found something odd in the preliminary search I did, she said quietly. There are payments going to something called Strategic Solutions, but I can't find any record of what services they provide. It took Maeve only a week to crack the mystery of Strategic Solutions. The company didn't exist, not really. It was just a bank account and a mailing address. But the really shocking part was who owned the account. Helena. My wife had been receiving $50,000 a month for consulting services she never provided. The payments went back almost 2 years, right around the time she started acting distant and cold toward me. But that wasn't even the worst part. While following the money trail, I discovered something that shattered what was left of my heart. Helena had been using the stolen money to pay for hotel rooms at the Grandview Hotel downtown. The same room, every Tuesday and Thursday, for the past 8 months. I sat in my car outside that hotel for 3 hours before I finally worked up the courage to go inside. The desk clerk recognized me immediately. Helena had apparently mentioned her husband several times. He assumed I was there to surprise her. Room 412. I took the elevator up, my hands shaking as I knocked on the door. Helena. I called softly. The door opened, and there was my wife in a silk robe. Behind her, I could see a man's suit jacket thrown over a chair. On the nightstand was Helena's pearl necklace, the one her grandmother had given her, the one she claimed was too precious to wear anywhere but special occasions. Helena's face went white when she saw me. Cashin, I can explain, Dash. But I was already walking away. The confrontation happened 3 days later in our kitchen. Helena had been avoiding me, staying late at work, or claiming to visit friends. But I cornered her over morning coffee, and everything came spilling out. Fine, she screamed when I showed her the bank records. Yes, I've been seeing someone else. Yes, I've been taking money. What are you going to do about it? Her laughter was cruel, cutting. You think you're so smart, figuring all this out? Cashin, you'll never matter. My father owns your life. He owns everything you think you have. Without us, you're nothing but some nobody from nowhere. I just stood there, letting her words wash over me. Part of me had hoped she might apologize, might show some regret. Instead, she was confirming everything I'd suspected about how little I meant to this family. I'm leaving, I said quietly. Good, she spat. Save us the trouble of throwing you out. I packed a bag and moved into a small apartment across town. But I wasn't running away. I was getting into position. That evening, Declan called with news that changed everything. That trust clause you found, he said, barely containing his excitement. I've been studying it all week. Cashin, if you file the right paperwork, you could own 51% of Armitage Global. Majority control. How is that possible? Reginald wrote it years ago as a tax shelter. He never imagined you'd be smart enough to use it against him. Filing the paperwork took 3 days. Declan handled everything through a law firm in another state, keeping our names off the documents as long as possible. The trust activation was completely legal. Reginald himself had signed the original agreement years ago. On paper, I now controlled 51% of Armitage Global's voting shares. The family had no idea what was coming. That same week, Reginald held a press conference to announce the company's restructuring. Standing in front of the Armitage Global building, surrounded by reporters, he looked directly into the cameras. We're making some changes to strengthen our family business, he said with that confident smile I'd grown to hate. This includes permanently removing certain individuals who no longer align with our values. My former son-in-law will no longer have any association with Armitage Global. The reporters ate it up. Several articles ran the next day about the family drama and speculation about what I'd done wrong. Social media was full of people taking sides, most of them assuming I must have done something terrible to deserve being cast out. Helena appeared on a morning talk show, playing the victim perfectly. It's been very difficult, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Sometimes people aren't who you think they are. I watched it all from my small apartment, eating cereal from a plastic bowl. Let them have their moment. Tomorrow was going to be very different. The monthly board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I arrived 15 minutes early, walking through the front doors of Armitage Global like I owned the place. Because technically I did. The security guards looked confused but didn't stop me. My access card still worked. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor and walked straight into the boardroom, where 12 surprised board members were having coffee and making small talk. Reginald was at the head of the table, naturally, with Helena beside him. When they saw me, the room went dead silent. "What is the meaning of this?" Reginald roared, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. "Security." Instead of leaving, I opened my briefcase and started distributing copies of the trust documents to every person at the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said calmly, "I think you need to see these before we proceed." Helena actually fainted, slumping forward onto the table. Reginald's face turned purple as he read the papers, his hands shaking with rage. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This can't be legal." "It's completely legal," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. "I now control 51% of this company's voting shares, which means I'm in charge." The board members were passing the documents around, whispering to each other. I could see the exact moment when each of them realized what this meant for their own positions. Then I dropped the second bombshell. "Oh, and I have evidence of embezzlement." I didn't release all the evidence at once. That would have been too easy, too quick. Instead, I started leaking small pieces to financial regulators, just enough to get their attention. A suspicious transaction here, an unexplained account there. Within a week, Armitage Global's stock price started dropping. Not crashing, just slowly bleeding value as investors began to worry about potential investigations. I also started feeding information to financial journalists. Nothing dramatic, just quiet tips about interesting questions they might want to ask about Armitage Global's accounting practices. The first major story ran in the Financial Herald with the headline, "Questions Surround Armitage Global's Offshore Holdings." It was a careful, professional piece that raised concerns without making accusations. Reginald called an emergency press conference to deny everything, but he looked rattled. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the sweaty desperation of a man who could feel the ground shifting under his feet. "These are baseless rumors spread by a disgruntled former employee," he told the reporters. "We stand behind our financial practices completely." But then the Herald published a follow-up piece. This time, they had documents, bank statements showing payments to shell companies, transfers to accounts in tax haven countries. The documents came with a note. "There's more where this came from." That same day, I received an anonymous email with just an address and a time. "Meet me at Murphy's Diner tomorrow at midnight. You need to see what else they've been hiding." Murphy's Diner was the kind of place that stayed open all night for truck drivers and insomniacs. At midnight, it was almost empty except for one figure hunched over coffee in a corner booth. I recognized him immediately. Thomas Brennan, who'd been the Armitage's accountant for over 20 years before mysteriously retiring 6 months ago. He looked like he'd aged a decade since I'd last seen him. "I've been waiting for someone like you to come along," he said quietly, sliding a USB drive across the table. "Someone with the power to actually do something about this." The USB contained decades of financial records that Thomas had secretly copied before leaving the company. Shell charities that never helped anyone, bribes disguised as consulting fees, tax evasion schemes that would make professional criminals jealous. "Why now?" I asked. Thomas's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "Because I'm dying. Cancer. And I can't take this to my grave knowing what they've done to people." One name on the ledgers made me stop breathing for a moment. Judge Harrison Blackwood, who'd been handling several cases involving Armitage business interests. He'd received over $2 million in donations to his favorite charities over the past 5 years. "They thought they were untouchable," Thomas said. "Reginald always said justice was just another thing money could buy." I looked at the evidence spread across the diner table. This wasn't just embezzlement anymore. This was corruption at the highest levels. "There's one more thing," Thomas said, pulling out a folder. "Helena's been skimming money for years too, but not for hotels and affairs. She's been building her own escape fund." Armed with Thomas's evidence, I had enough ammunition to destroy the Armitages completely. But I wanted to be strategic about it. First, I needed to consolidate my power within the company itself. I started reaching out to mid-level executives, department heads, and senior managers, the people who actually ran Armitage Global day-to-day, but whom Reginald had always ignored or dismissed. "Things are going to change around here," I told them in private meetings. "I want to build something better, something honest. But I need people I can trust." Most of them jumped at the chance. They'd been watching the Armitage's corruption for years, feeling helpless to stop it. Now they had someone with the power to actually clean the house. Martha Jameson, the head of human resources, was particularly eager to help. "I've got files full of harassment complaints and labor violations that Reginald buried," she said. Sexual harassment, wage theft, unsafe working conditions. He paid off inspectors and threatened victims into silence. Within 2 weeks, I had a coalition of employees ready to support major changes. They provided inside information about ongoing schemes, helped identify which executives were corrupt, and gave me credibility with the workforce. That's when Helena made her move. She released a series of videos on social media showing me arguing with her during our marriage. The videos were heavily edited to make me look aggressive and unstable, removing all context about what we were actually fighting about. "My abusive ex-husband is trying to destroy my family out of spite," she told a sympathetic reporter. "I'm afraid of what he might do next." Helena's smear campaign backfired spectacularly. The same day her videos went viral, I released Thomas's evidence about her personal embezzlement scheme. Bank records showing she'd stolen over $3 million over 5 years, far more than even her father knew about. The financial press went crazy. Here was the woman playing victim on television while secretly running her own theft operation. The contrast was devastating. Better yet, the evidence showed Helena had been stealing from the children's charity her family supposedly supported. Money donated to help sick kids had gone straight into her personal accounts. Within hours, Helena received a subpoena to testify before a grand jury. Her victim act fell apart when reporters started asking why she needed $3 million in secret accounts if she was really the innocent daughter she claimed to be. But the biggest shock came that evening. I was reviewing financial documents when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Meet me at midnight. Same place. You're not going to believe what I found." It was Thomas again, but this time he sounded excited instead of scared. When I got to Murphy's Diner, he was practically bouncing in his seat. "I kept digging after our last meeting," he said, sliding another USB across the table. "Guess who else has been stealing from the family fortune?" The new documents were mind-blowing. Lady Beatrix Armitage, Reginald's supposedly devoted wife of 30 years, had been siphoning money into secret accounts for over a decade. She'd stolen more than anyone, nearly $15 million that she'd hidden in Swiss banks and real estate investments under fake names. "She's been planning to leave him for years," Thomas explained, "just waiting for the right moment to disappear with all the money." The documents Thomas provided were like nuclear weapons. Not only did they prove the Armitages were corrupt, they showed the family was completely rotten, with everyone stealing from everyone else. But the most explosive revelation was about Judge Harrison Blackwood. The bribes were just the beginning. He'd also fixed cases, buried evidence, and even helped arrange for witnesses to disappear in cases that threatened Armitage interests. I spent the next week carefully planning how to use this information for maximum impact. Instead of releasing everything at once, I decided to let it build slowly, each revelation making the next one more credible. First, I gave the judge's information to the FBI. Within days, federal agents raided his chambers and his home. The news coverage was massive. A sitting federal judge arrested for corruption was front-page news everywhere. When reporters asked if the investigation was connected to Armitage Global, I simply said, "You'll have to ask the FBI about that." The pressure was building perfectly. Armitage Global's stock had lost 40% of its value. Major clients were cutting ties. The board of directors was demanding answers that Reginald couldn't provide. That's when I got the call I'd been expecting. "We need to talk," Reginald said. His voice sounded defeated, exhausted. "Just you and me. Man to man. I'm listening. $20 million. Cash. Walk away from all of this, and you'll never have to work again." "Not interested." $50 million. I hung up on him. 2 days after I rejected Reginald's bribe attempt, federal agents raided every Armitage Global office simultaneously. I watched it happen from across the street, seeing FBI agents carrying out boxes of documents while news cameras rolled. The raids were perfectly coordinated. Offices in 3 states, plus the family's personal properties, all hid at the same time. The authorities had used Thomas's evidence to get warrants for everything. Reginald tried to maintain his dignity as agents searched his office, but I could see the panic in his eyes through the windows. 30 years of carefully built power crumbling in a single morning. The media coverage was incredible. Every news channel led with the story of the untouchable Armitage family finally facing justice. Financial experts explained how the corruption scheme worked, using charts and graphs that made it clear even to casual viewers. Helena tried to flee. Airport security found her at a private jet terminal with 2 suitcases full of cash and a fake passport. The arrest footage showed her screaming at the officers, her composed public image completely destroyed. That evening, Armitage Global's stock price crashed completely. Trading was suspended after the shares became essentially worthless. 40 years of building the family business, wiped out in less than 24 hours. I sat in my apartment, watching the coverage on 3 different news channels, eating Chinese takeout from plastic containers. It felt surreal seeing something I'd planned for months finally happening in real time. My phone kept ringing with interview requests, but I wasn't ready to talk publicly yet. There was still more work to do. Reginald's television interview was a disaster from the moment it started. Appearing on the evening news, he looked haggard and desperate, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his expensive suit wrinkled. "These charges are completely fabricated," he insisted to the reporter. "My former son-in-law has manufactured all of this evidence as revenge for his failed marriage." The reporter, clearly prepared, started asking specific questions about the Swiss bank accounts, the shell companies, the payments to Judge Blackwood. Reginald's answers became increasingly frantic. That's when I made my move. During a commercial break, I called the television station and offered to provide real-time fact-checking. They put me on speakerphone, and I started reading verified bank transfer records that contradicted every single thing Reginald had just said. "Transfer from Armitage Global to Crown Holdings, March 15th, $500,000, I said calmly. Crown Holdings is owned by Reginald Armitage's wife, Beatrix. The money was then transferred to Credit Suisse Bank in Geneva within 48 hours. I could see Reginald through the studio monitors, his face getting redder with each revelation. When the camera came back on him, he was speechless. The interview ended with the reporter thanking me for the clarification, while Reginald sat there like a broken man. The next morning, Armitage Global stock opened down another 47%. The company that had been worth billions when I first married Helena was now worth less than a small restaurant chain. I spent that day taking calls from business journalists, carefully explaining the timeline of the corruption while making sure to sound reasonable and factual rather than vindictive. The investigative journalist Elcira Knox had been working on the story for weeks, but when her exposé finally published, it was more devastating than I'd imagined possible. The headline read, "The Armitage Children's Foundation, a 20-year fraud that stole from sick kids." Elcira had traced every dollar that should have gone to children's hospitals and medical research. Instead, it had gone to luxury vacations, expensive art collections, and political bribes. The foundation was nothing but a tax dodge disguised as charity. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Within hours, protesters gathered outside the Armitage family mansion. Parents of sick children who had donated to the foundation gave tearful interviews about feeling betrayed and manipulated. The images were powerful. Desperate families who had given their last dollars to help other children, only to learn their money had bought Reginald a yacht instead. But the most damaging evidence was a video that surfaced the same day. Security footage from the foundation's offices showed Helena screaming at staff members, throwing files around, and calling sick children disgusting little money drains. The video went viral within hours. Helena's reputation was completely destroyed. The woman who had spent years cultivating an image as a caring philanthropist was revealed as someone genuinely who despised the very people she claimed to help. I watched the video 3 times, remembering how different Helena had seemed when I first met her. Either she'd been an incredible actress back then, or power and money had corrupted her into something monstrous. That evening, the first death threats against the Armitage family were reported to police. Judge Blackwood's resignation hit the news like a bomb. A federal judge with a 30-year career stepping down in disgrace sent shockwaves through the legal system. The resignation letter was leaked to the press, and it was damning. Blackwood admitted to taking bribes, fixing cases, and helping wealthy criminals avoid justice. He specifically mentioned being compromised by my relationship with the Armitage family. The political fallout was immediate. Every politician who had ever taken money from the Armitages started running for cover. Campaign contribution records were scrutinized. Photo opportunities from charity events were suddenly embarrassing liabilities. Senator Robertson, who had received over $500,000 in Armitage donations, held a press conference to announce he was donating all of it to real children's charities. "I was deceived by people I trusted," he said, though everyone could see the fear in his eyes. "Using my controlling stake in the company, I froze all Armitage family accounts. Every credit card, every investment account, every source of ready cash was suddenly inaccessible." Reginald found out when his platinum card was declined at an expensive restaurant. According to witnesses, he caused a scene, screaming at the waiter and threatening to sue everyone in sight. The same day, Helena's arrest in Monaco made international headlines. The mugshot showed her looking haggard and desperate, nothing like the polished socialite she pretended to be. Someone leaked the photo to every gossip website and social media platform. Within hours, the image had been turned into memes mocking her downfall. "From riches to orange jumpsuits," read one popular caption. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Helena's trial was the media event of the year. I testified for the prosecution, calmly walking the jury through the evidence of her theft, her fraud, and her complete lack of remorse for stealing from sick children. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former donors to the fake charity, and families who had been victimized by the Armitage's schemes. Helena sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller and more pathetic than I'd ever seen her. When the prosecutor asked me to describe my marriage, I kept my voice steady and factual. She used our relationship to access company information and steal money. When I discovered the fraud, she laughed and told me I would never matter because her father owned everything I thought I had. The jury listened to every word, occasionally glancing at Helena with obvious disgust. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of her father's manipulation, but the evidence was too clear. I testified for 4 hours, providing details about forged documents, secret accounts, and the systematic theft of millions of dollars. Every time Helena's lawyer tried to suggest I was lying or exaggerating, I produced another document that proved my point. After my testimony, I left the courthouse and found Reginald sitting on the front steps, clutching his chest and breathing heavily. He looked up at me with eyes full of fear and hatred. "You've killed me," he whispered. "You've destroyed everything I built." "No," I replied. "I just showed everyone what you really built." That evening, news broke that Reginald had been hospitalized with a heart attack. Armitage Global was finished. The stock had become completely worthless, trading for pennies before being delisted entirely. Major clients had fled to competitors. Key employees were jumping ship daily. The company that had once employed thousands was now a skeleton crew trying to manage the legal fallout. Lawyers were everywhere, trying to untangle decades of fraud while protecting whatever assets might be recovered. I walked through the empty offices one last time, looking at the expensive furniture and artwork that would soon be seized by federal marshals. The place felt like a tomb, a monument to greed and corruption. The board of directors had voted to dissolve the company completely. There was no way to rebuild trust after everything that had come out. The Armitage name had become toxic, associated with corruption and child exploitation. I signed the papers that officially ended Armitage Global, using a pen that Reginald had given me as a wedding present years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. The employees who were still loyal to the old regime were panicking, but I'd already arranged jobs for the honest ones at other companies. Martha Jameson would become head of HR at a major competitor. Thomas Brennan's information had helped prosecutors in 3 other corruption cases. The dishonest ones, the managers who had helped hide the fraud, the executives who had participated in the schemes, were on their own. That afternoon, I received word that Helena had been found guilty on all charges. 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. The asset seizure was like watching vultures pick apart a carcass. Federal marshals tagged everything valuable in the Armitage properties: artwork, jewelry, cars, boats, even furniture. The family's crown jewel, their ancestral estate outside the city, was scheduled for auction along with everything else. Reporters camped outside the gates, filming as the family's possessions were loaded onto trucks. I attended the auction, sitting in the back of the crowded room as strangers bid on pieces of the Armitage legacy. The ancestral portrait of Reginald's grandfather sold for $1,200. Helena's wedding dress went for $50. When the estate itself came up for bidding, I raised my hand. $5 million, I said clearly. The auctioneer seemed surprised. Do I hear 5.5? Silence. 5 million was more than anyone else was willing to pay for property associated with such a scandal. Sold to bidder number 47. I now own the house where I'd been humiliated so many times, the place where Reginald had laughed and told me I was nothing without them. But I wasn't planning to live there. The next week, I signed papers donating the entire estate to the city as a public park. The mansion would become a community center. The gardens would be open to families. Children would play where the Armitages had once plotted their crimes. The story made national news. Former son-in-law turns corrupt family estate into public park. The day the park opened, I watched families arrive with picnic baskets and children's toys. The contrast was perfect. Joy and innocence replacing greed and corruption. A local news crew interviewed me as kids played on the lawn where Reginald had once hosted his corrupt dinner parties. Any regrets? The reporter asked. Only that it took so long. The social exile was complete and brutal. Former friends and business associates treated the Armitages like they had a contagious disease. Charity events they had once hosted were canceled. Country clubs revoked their memberships. Society pages that had once celebrated them now mocked their downfall. I watched Reginald get turned away from his favorite restaurant, the one where he'd held power lunches for decades. The maitre d' claimed they were fully booked, even though half the tables were empty. Lady Beatrix's secret accounts were finally discovered and frozen. Her plans to flee with $15 million evaporated overnight. She was arrested trying to board a plane to Switzerland with nothing but a single suitcase and a fake passport. The woman who had played the devoted wife for 30 years was revealed as the family's most successful thief. The society pages had a field day with the story of her planned betrayal. Helena's former friends gave interviews explaining how they'd always suspected something was wrong. She was always so cruel to service workers. One former bridesmaid told a gossip magazine. We thought it was just stress, but now we realize it was who she really was. The family's reputation was so toxic that even distant relatives changed their names to avoid association. Cousins who had benefited from Armitage money for years suddenly claimed they'd always disapproved of the family's methods. That's when Maeve uncovered the final betrayal. Records from Swiss banks showed that even during their marriage, Beatrix had been planning to let Reginald take the fall alone while she disappeared with the stolen money. When I leaked this information to the tabloids, even Reginald's remaining supporters abandoned him. The tabloid headlines were brutal. Ice Queen wife's ultimate betrayal and Armitage matriarch's 20-year con. The story dominated every gossip show and social media platform. Here was the woman who had stood by her husband through decades of corruption, only to reveal that she'd been planning the ultimate double-cross the entire time. Court documents showed that Beatrix had been moving money to secret accounts since 1995, long before any of the recent investigations began. She'd been stealing from her own family, preparing for the day when she could disappear and leave everyone else to face the consequences. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that even prosecutors seemed shocked. This shows a level of premeditation and callousness that's rare even in white-collar crime. One federal attorney told reporters. Reginald's reaction to learning about his wife's betrayal was captured on security cameras outside the courthouse. He collapsed, screaming her name and pounding the pavement with his fists while reporters filmed everything. That evening, news broke that Reginald had filed for bankruptcy. The man who had once controlled hundreds of millions of dollars was officially broken, his assets either seized by the government or stolen by his own wife. The bankruptcy filing was front-page news in the financial press. From billions to bankruptcy, the complete collapse of Reginald Armitage. I kept the newspaper clipping as a souvenir. The final legal proceedings dragged on for months, but the outcome was inevitable. Beatrix received 30 years in prison. Reginald got 25 years, plus full restitution to everyone he'd defrauded. The sentences were longer than most murder convictions, reflecting the scope of their crimes and the number of victims they'd hurt. The last encounter happened at Murphy's Diner, The same place where Thomas had first given me the evidence that brought everything down. I was having coffee and reading reports about the final asset seizures when Reginald walked in. He looked like a different person, thin, gray, wearing clothes that were obviously borrowed or bought from a thrift store. The man who had once owned everything was reduced to begging for spare change. He approached my table slowly, his eyes full of desperation and something that might have been shame. "Please," he whispered, sitting down across from me. "I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. Can you help me?" "Just enough for food, for a place to stay." I studied his face, remembering every humiliation, every cruel laugh, every moment he'd made me feel worthless. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $1 coin. I placed it on the table between us, the metallic clink echoing in the quiet diner. "Now you're worth what you said I was," I said quietly. Reginald stared at the coin, his hands shaking. "Please, cash in. I have nothing left. Nothing. You have exactly what you deserve." I stood up, leaving him there with his dollar and his broken dreams. As I walked toward the door, I could hear him crying, quiet, desperate sobs from a man who had lost everything. That same week, Elcira Knox's exposé series won the National Journalism Award for Investigative Reporting. During her acceptance speech, she thanked her sources and dedicated the award to everyone who believes that truth and justice are worth fighting for. In her closing remarks, she said something that made headlines. "The Armitage name has become synonymous with corruption and greed. It will take generations for people to forget what this family did to innocent children and honest workers." The name that had once opened doors and commanded respect was now a cautionary tale told in business schools and ethics classes. The final step was erasing the Armitage name from everything they had ever touched. Using my legal authority as the company's former controller, I systematically removed their family name from every business, every building, every scholarship fund. Armitage Global became Integrity Solutions. The Armitage Foundation for Children became the Children's Healthcare Trust. The Armitage Business School at the local university was renamed after a teacher who had actually helped children instead of stealing from them. I hired a team of lawyers whose only job was to find every trace of the Armitage name in corporate records, legal documents, and public institutions. Wherever I found it, I had it changed to something better, something honest. The family fought back through their own lawyers, claiming I was exceeding my authority. But the courts ruled that since the name had become associated with criminal activity, removing it was actually protecting other people's interests. The process took 8 months and cost over $2 million, but it was worth every penny. By the time I was finished, you could search public records for hours without finding a single business or institution that bore the Armitage name. Helena, serving her sentence in federal prison, somehow got access to a phone and called a news station. The recording of her screaming my name and threatening revenge from behind bars became another viral video. "Cashinvey destroyed my family," she shrieked. "He's a monster. Someone needs to stop him." The irony was perfect. Here was a woman who had stolen from sick children, calling someone else a monster because he had exposed her crimes. The video was shared millions of times, usually with captions mocking her complete lack of self-awareness. 6 months later, I stood at the entrance to the park that had once been the Armitage estate. Children were running across the grass, their laughter echoing off the trees. Families were having picnics where Reginald had once plotted his crimes. The bronze plaque beside the main gate was simple and clean. "Vey Family Community Park, donated for the benefit of all children." No mention of the Armitages. No trace of their legacy except the good that had grown from its ashes. I raised a glass of champagne. Nothing expensive, just something decent from the local store, and made a quiet toast to the evening air. "They said I was nothing without them," I whispered. "Now, they are nothing at all." A little girl ran past, chasing a butterfly, her parents following behind with tired but happy faces. This was what justice looked like. Not revenge, but renewal. Not destruction, but the chance to build something better. My phone buzzed with a text from Martha Jameson, who was thriving at her new job. Saw the news about Helena's parole being denied. Couldn't happen to a nicer person. I smiled and put the phone away. Helena would serve every day of her sentence. Reginald would die in prison. Beatrix had already suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed. Their name was gone. Their money was gone. Their power was gone. Everything they had built through lies and theft had crumbled to dust. But the park would remain. The community center would help families for generations. The honest businesses that had replaced their corrupt empire would provide good jobs for good people. As the sun set behind the trees, I walked back to my car, leaving behind the place where I had once been humiliated and dismissed. Tomorrow, I would start building something new, something honest, something that would last. The Armitage name was worthless now, forgotten except as a cautionary tale. But mine would be remembered for all the right reasons. Please subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories.